Hello, welcome back to Make Your Monday here at Okashicon Online. I know a lot of y'all aren't here yet, which is okay. I'm going to give you a couple of announcements while I wait for people to show up. I know that quite a few of my regulars have said that you're coming tonight, so I'm keeping an eye on those numbers. I'm also going to be sitting here trying to thread this needle while I'm doing the announcements, because I know the last thing y'all want to do is watch me thread a needle while we're in the middle of this presentation. So if I can be doing that now, that's what I will do to spare you the really boring things to watch. A couple of announcements. So this is not our usual day of the month. This is the third Monday. We normally are the second Monday. We did have a special broadcast last week that was a replay from 1 year ago, which was an overview of Japanese fiber arts that I did. I did that for a different YouTube channel, but we were able to rebroadcast since that is my content. And hopefully you were able to watch that. I know we had quite a few people in attendance last week, and if you were one of them, I thank you. I appreciate your time. Also, so the reason why we had to delay is that I had the second round of the vaccine and it kind of knocked me out. In fact, my husband is still asleep in the bedroom. He's not doing so hot. So it was... Y'all, if you haven't had the vaccine, the COVID vaccine yet, especially if you've got one of the two that has a second dose, that second dose can be a real whammy. So, and again, remember, I'm not ignoring you. I'm trying to thread this needle because I had this fantastic needle that I was working with this afternoon, and then I dropped it on the floor and now I can't find it. So it's going to take me a lot longer to thread this one. And I know you don't want to sit there and just watch. And now I dropped it, but let's go back to the announcements instead. I guess you will be stuck watching me thread the needle. Also, my hair is wet. I would apologize, but I thought you might like it clean rather than dirty. And so yeah, it'll be drying throughout the presentation night. You'll see it change color ever so slightly as you're going along. Other announcements. Remember that I also do a program on the fourth Sunday of every month, and that is Japan Stories. And this particular month, so that is coming up this next Sunday, is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. It is accessible travel within Japan. So if you have any kind of mobility, hearing impairment, vision impairment, or other disabilities of whatever kind, and you would like to travel to Japan, but you're a little bit nervous about how your disabilities or impairments might affect your travel and your travel plans, we've got you. I have a wonderful interview with Josh Grisdale of Accessible Japan. So he is the #1 guru for how to get around Japan, especially if you're in a wheelchair. He's been in Japan since 2006. And so he's really the expert, and he'll be talking through some of his tips and his resources. He runs one of the best resources available on the planet for traveling in Japan with disabilities. So please do come back on Sunday at 2 p.m. Central Time. And it should be a really great show because, like I said, this is absolutely my favorite, most important topic for me because I would not be able to travel without it. And if I couldn't travel, I couldn't bring you these shows with all of these techniques that I learned while I was over there. Also, we do have an announcement. Let's see if we can get the graphic up. We have Okashicon, the J Fashion Committee, which is the Japanese street fashion type of stuff. In fact, what I'm wearing tonight is from one of those stores, ACDC Rag. The J Fashion group is having a meetup on Zoom and is called the Floral Frill for All. They would like to invite everyone to attend the Floral Frill for All. We'll be getting frilly and flowers and our favorite floral prints to share our favorite flowers, minus sakura. You guys know that. If you didn't see my sakura show recently, check our YouTube channel. Anyway, share our favorite flowers, play games, and socialize with friends. Please join us. They do have a pre-registration, but it is going to be available on Zoom. Please check the Okashicon Facebook page. This information is available. So if you wear any type of J fashion or Japanese clothing of any kind, it really doesn't have to be the modern style. It could be a yukata or things like that. Whatever floats your boat, you are welcome to attend this. This is the sign up just went up yesterday, so it is on our Facebook group now, and it is on the 8th of May. So those are the main announcements. Now I'm going to sit here and still try to thread this needle. I'm gonna sit here. I know that a lot of you guys have still not arrived yet. I shouldn't say guys. Y'all have not arrived yet. People who have texted me earlier today and said they were coming. I'm watching that number. I see 2 more have just showed up. Please remember that I would really, really appreciate it if you don't have a Twitch account. Take a moment right now, go sign up. It's free. If you're on Amazon Prime, you can also link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, and then you won't see the commercials. I know they can be kind of annoying, but that's the only way we can provide you this content for free. Otherwise, Twitch would charge us, and we don't want to do that. So if you have Amazon Prime, sign up for a Twitch account, do the subscribe for free, get no commercials, and then you can comment during the live broadcast. Because it's really helpful for me to know if you're understanding what I'm talking about, if you still have questions or comments, if you're confused. Many of you have contacted me afterwards, and that is always okay. I don't want you to feel like that's not an acceptable option. You're always welcome to contact me. Tell me how you did. Show me what your projects were like. If you do post it on Instagram stories, be sure to ping me because I don't always check Instagram stories before it goes off. Please drop me an instant message or something like that so that I will see it because I really love seeing your work. Remember, you can always tag me Kintsugi Style or Juliana in Japan, but more importantly, you can tag Okashicon, and Okashicon will make sure that information gets to me. So if you don't remember how to spell Okashicon, it is right up here in the corner, and you got to our Twitch page somehow. So hopefully you know how to spell it. And Okashicon is, of course, our social media name on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and everywhere else. So just give us a ping, and we would love to see your projects, especially tonight. I think what I have for you is going to be very easy, and a lot of you are going to be able to do this pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and switch over to the overhead camera, and I will show you what we're working with. I still didn't get this needle threaded, so we're going to have, and then I dropped it. So there we go. Remember, y'all, I'm still struggling with the post-vaccine effects. So it's going to be a little bit sluggish tonight, but I know you guys are patient and you have my back. And you get to look at my keyboard because I couldn't tuck it far enough out of the way. There we go. What we are making tonight, let me turn these around because I forget that my camera is upside down. These are the examples of simple sewn bindings. This is one that I purchased in Japan. I have made several before. This is one where the sewing is on top. This is one I made earlier in the afternoon. It's not the prettiest. One thing that is happening to a lot of us as a result of the vaccine is we're getting kind of shaky. So if you see my hands wobbling a little like this, several of us have been having that post-vaccine, post the second dose, especially with Moderna. So I'm doing my best to continue, but some of my stitches are a little bit wonky as a result of it. But that is also a practice issue, and I guarantee if you take a little bit more time than I did, you won't have these slightly loose, wobbly stitches. But I will show you how to fix that as well, because sometimes having a mistake here for you to look at is a good learning tool too. But we're going to start with this, which is a pamphlet stitch binding. And this is sewn on the inside. It doesn't look like much right here, but this is what we'll be starting with. So first, I'll just briefly talk about why this is on Make Your Monday when this is technically a Japanese-related craft. Pamphlet stitch is not necessarily specific to Japan. It's done throughout the world. But this side-sewn binding or top-sewn binding is very unique to Japan. There are a bunch of different types of stitches that you can do on the side. I'm only showing you the very basic one. Well, my tension was really off on this. I'm only showing you the very basic one because it's the easiest, but certainly if you look online, there are ones where all of these little side pieces here can get very fancy. You can have multiple threads going in different directions. It can be a lot prettier than this, and you can have a decorative cover, all kinds of things. So I'll show you what this one looks like because, again, this is one I purchased. I purchased a year ago, 2 years ago yesterday in Oita, which is our sister city. So you may remember that Austin and Oita are sister cities, and we've had a relationship for 31 years now. Well, this I purchased just outside of Oita. And this is a book. A lot of people would be like, well, what do you use it for? I use it for preserving flowers. And then you go places in Japan. Look at that. There's a sakura there. Remember my favorite flower. Here's another beautiful sakura, but it's still sakura season. Barely still sakura season. These are the double petaled ones. You'll not need that whole thing. Watch my show from last month. Watch both of my shows from March, and you'll see all the sakura you could ever want to know. But again, you can go various places in Japan, and they have these cool stamps. Like there's a Pokemon stamp in here. There's a cinnamon roll. All kinds of cool stamps that you can get. And I just chose to use this particular book to put my stamps in. Hi, Ashley. So glad you're here. Hey, Claudia. I'm so happy you're here too. I really appreciate you guys. You've only really just missed kind of announcements, and then I'm just talking about what we're going to be doing tonight. I did say, I know, Claudia, you're having the same problem. I've still got the shakes after the second vaccine. My husband's got the shakes after the second vaccine. So it's going to be a little hard for me to thread needles tonight. You just have to be a little bit patient because it's, I had the perfect needle and I dropped it and I don't know where it is. So I'm going to have a little less good needle and it's going to be harder to thread. But these are the projects that we'll be working on, starting with the pamphlet stitch binding because it's very, very simple. Then we're going to go on to a sign sewn binding, or you can use it on a top sewn binding. Either way, they're all super basic and you really don't need sewing skills. You really don't need any technical ability. You do need a little bit of patience. You don't even need dry hair. Remember, my hair is still wet. Oh, anyway, we'll start with the pamphlet stitch. And a lot of people will probably go, this is a very thin little book. Like, what are you gonna do with it? Well, some of you out there I know are big stationery geeks. Meredith, if you're there, I hope you have created a Twitch account that you can comment. If not, contact me later, but I know you probably know what the Midori line, it is a Japanese line of notebooks. There's one called the Traveler's Notebook, and it takes a bunch of little pamphlet stitch notebooks, or here's one that I pulled out of. These are just little, this is the same thing. These are commercial ones. I purchased them at Target several years ago. These are just pamphlet stitch notebooks, and they pop them together in a larger binding, and they're used for travel. So you can just pull one out, have it in your back pocket when you're traveling. Ooh, I'm getting washed out in my light. Have it in your back pocket when you're traveling, use it for journaling, sketching, whatever, and then they put it in a larger case. So just because it looks like you only get a few pages for one of these doesn't mean you can't put them together in another binder, which I can show you. You can look up this concept called Faux-dori. In fact, I will type it into the chat. Fauxdori, Faux-dori. If you look that up, it is basically for making a fake Midori Traveler's Notebook. And there are instructions. You learn how to do the pamphlet stitch, then you can make a very basic binding to put these in. Claudia, I know you love making books with pockets. And I honestly, sometimes if I'm making books like this, you can buy the little plastic sheets that have like binder reports or things, they're just plastic sheets with little clips on them. You can actually sew those in here as well. And then you can have little pockets sewn into this. For tonight on the supply list, I just told you to use copy paper because I believe in practicing with cheap things that you happen to have handy around the house. But you can certainly do this with, with nicer paper, like a nice, Fox River for calligraphy practice. You can do watercolor paper if you want to make this into an art journal. And again, Meredith, if you're watching, I'm not sure if you are, but remember the washi tape program that we did in January where I said you can put samples of your washi tape on freezer paper and make yourself a little sampler notebook. You can then take those freezer paper pages and sew them into either of these types of books so that you have your freezer paper, your washi tape sampler ready to reference at any time. And you don't have to be digging through your piles and piles of washi tape to see what it is that you're looking for. So I hope that you kind of got an idea that it's a little bit more flexible than just sticking together a couple pieces of copy paper. You really can use all kinds of different, you can use junk mail if you want to. Some people really like to upcycle junk mail. So you can take, trying to see if I have anything around here. Oh, well, instead of junk mail, here's some of the paper that we dyed back in the November class. You could use this for a decorative cover, for instance. You can bind a bunch of these together and then write on top of it as a travel journal, that type of thing. So Although I said copy paper tonight, that is just for practice. Any type of paper will work. This is actually a handmade mulberry paper that I used for the cover. I didn't realize when I pulled this out, it has a little bit of glitter on it. So now there's glitter everywhere on my desk. Remember, glitter is the disease of crafting. Once you get it out, it goes all over the entire house. So oops, but it's still kind of fun. But yeah, any paper whatsoever. So we'll start with the pamphlet stitch, which is this type. Then I'll show you moving on to a side sewn binding. And remember, these are really easy. There are only two complicated parts of the process, one of which is threading the stupid needle. I really struggle with that, y'all. I really struggle with that. In fact, I've lost the needle on the desk again. I don't even know where it's gone. Here it is. Here's my needle. This needle, I don't even know where it's going to go. Here we go. Threading the needle and then punching the holes. Those are the only two complicated parts of this. So let's start. Let me pull this one back out so that I can show you the parts of the pamphlet book. So as you can see, this is a decorative cover. There's nothing special about this. It is not cardstock. It's just fancy paper. It happens to be a mulberry paper made from 100% post-consumer recycled waste. Really doesn't matter. Something I bought for card making at a big box craft store many years ago and decided to pull out for today. So let me see if you can see that a little better. Then inside, I just have pieces of copy paper folded in half. If you really wanted to, you could fold it in half the other way. I don't know what you'd use that for, but you know, you do you, whatever you like. But I just took a bunch of copy paper, folded it in half. I took like a bone folder. This is actually a point turner, but it's the same thing as a bone folder. And I just used it to press down all my creases when I folded them in half so it lays a little flatter. You could use a popsicle stick. You could use the backside of scissors. You could use your ruler. You could use the back of a spoon. None of it really matters. It's just having a little bit of pressure and something kind of smooth can make it lay a little bit more flat, which, you know, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to put it into a binder with some other books and you want to have it nice and compact, then that little extra step will help. But that is completely optional. But what you do is you take your pieces of paper, your copy paper that have been folded in half. Now in this case, I just took a whole bundle and folded them all together. I have about 5 pieces of paper here. You can do anywhere up to about 20 sheets of paper. It gets difficult to poke the holes, and you'll see in a minute that poking the holes through a bunch of pages can be difficult, and maybe you'll have to do it a couple of times, different, you know, a couple pages at once and then another couple of pages. Once you get above about 20 pages, it's going to get to be too fat for it to stick together. Here's the papers that I have for the next project. And you can see that it would get kind of bulky if you had all your pages together. That wouldn't necessarily be a very nice pamphlet stitch. It would just kind of hold open. So I recommend you keep it to 5 to 10 full-size pages, then fold it in half. It's going to be, you know, 10 to 20 pages like this. That's an optimum thickness for it. But, you know, I don't want you to feel like there's specific numbers to any of this. That's not true. This is just however you feel like, how you want to use them. Let me have a sip of water because I'm tripping over my own tongue for a minute. Okay, your next step after you've got, I usually like to do this, and then I will fold my decorative paper. I have another one from the same collection. I go ahead and fold this on itself. I picked this one out just so I could show you how I use the bone folder. You just line it up carefully. By the way, if you like origami, next month we are going to be covering origami jewelry. So that should be a lot of fun. But there you go. This is a basic mountain fold. You've learned one thing to get you ahead for next month. It was that simple. That simple. Anyway, you now have your decorative cover. And you have, in my case, 5 sheets of paper that have already been pre-folded. Now, it is helpful at this point, not required, just helpful, to have something to hold these sheets of paper together. So you kind of want to stack them to make sure they're all properly aligned, and then use a small clamp. You can use clothespins. You can use, paper clips. I have somewhere, a binder clip. I have any of these things will work. You want to have something that's probably not going to mar the paper too much. So sometimes these binder clips can be a little bit too aggressive. And that's why really the most gentle would be a wooden clothespin. But whatever you have handy. And in fact, if you don't have anything handy, you can use a little bit of washi tape to try to hold the ends together. You're really just trying to keep the pages all together in one spot while you're trying to drill the holes and start stitching. Now, in this case, you may want to start with a template, just a piece of scrap paper or scrap cardstock. I don't usually do that at this stage. I usually wait. I'll do that for the next project. But for this one, I just go ahead and I start marking where my holes are going to go. I would use a pencil, but so that you can see it on camera, I'm using an erasable pen. Luster Candy Cosplay says, what about chip clips? If they're not really stiff, so I would just test it out on a couple pieces of paper. If it's like crushing the paper, a lot of chip clips are gentle, so that should be fine. But I also have some chip clips that are really like have strong magnets in them. I'm not sure why. Those would be a little bit too strong of a clamp. But even this is actually like a hardware store clamp. And because it has a little rubber tip on there, I find it doesn't mark my paper. So chip clips can be fine. I have towel clips that hold my background on. You can't really see up here, but they're like really big clips that you could use for, they're supposed to be for hanging your beach towels over a lounge, people who actually go to a pool or a beach, not me. I'm sure they're quite handy if you actually leave the house, but I've forgotten what that's like. Any type of clip that has a low grip strength, it's not going to crush you to death. That should be just fine. I find that the bigger they are, the more they can kind of get in your way. So if you're doing just pamphlet stitch books, sometimes a paper clip is the best. But I can't find any right now, so that really doesn't matter. Anyway, you've got your pages clipped together. You really don't need 3. I would just use 1 clip on each side, and that is plenty. You now want to mark where your holes are going to go. Now, how many holes you need kind of depends on how big your paper is. You saw that, some of these ones that I was showing you are smaller size paper. These are obviously sort of like a quarter size instead of a half size. I would use 3 holes if you had a small size like this one. For this size, I'm going to use 5. It really doesn't matter as long as it's an odd number. I find 5 for copy paper is it's a good number that's substantial enough. It's going to hold it together, but it's not going to take you a long time to do the binding. You can see my hair is drying and getting very fluffy, but oh well, I keep messing with it. I've forgotten what it's like to leave the house and do things. Okay, get your ruler. The ruler is the one thing that I can say is essential. Unless you want to eyeball it, in which case you can eyeball it. Hi to the new people who've just arrived. Please take a moment to sign up for a Twitch account so that you can comment live. I would really appreciate that. Remember, if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you can get Amazon Prime switch to Twitch Prime so that you won't see commercials during this live broadcast. When commercials happen, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. We do try to run them early and then late so that they don't interrupt us, but we have no control over that. That is entirely up to Twitch, and Twitch has to make their money somehow, otherwise they don't give us this for free. So again, back to what we're doing. We're back on the pamphlet stitch. We have a ruler here. Now, you want to start by measuring about a 1/2 inch, that's about 1.5 centimeters if you think in metric, about a 1/2 inch from each side of the paper for your first holes. So sorry, this is going to be upside down for you, but I really need to be able to see where my lines are. Get your ruler lined up right on the mark, and then mark the best you can right in. See, I missed that, right in the where the crease is. I use an erasable pen so that when I screw up like that, I can fix it. Again, you go back down, Here, try to line it up and move in 1/2 inch at this point. I'm going to try to do this correctly. Now you want to find the midpoint of your paper. Because my paper is 8.5 by 11, so it is US letter size, I happen to know that half of 8.5 is 4.25. So I'm going to come down here to 4.25 and make my next mark right there. That should be the center of my paper. Now, again, if you wanted to eyeball those, that's fine. I just happen to be a little particular about it. Next, you want to find the point that is halfway in between these points here. I happen to know, because I measured it earlier, that that is 1 7/8 of an inch. I can't tell you what that is in metric. I could look it up for you, but I don't know. But 1 7/8 of an inch is right about here. That doesn't look right. Well, let me try this again. There we go, because I was doing 1 7/8 of an inch. And I keep missing the center here. Again, an erasable pen or erasable pencil is your friend in this case. Once again, come down here. 1 7/8 of an inch should be, and your lines should be more or less equidistant from each other, your holes. You can go back and measure them if you want to make sure that they're accurate. That depends on how precise you want to be. It's really not going to show. Again, I'll show you what the finished object looks like. If they're slightly off, you're not going to be able to see from this side or the inside. So I don't feel like you have to be, millimeter accurate on this. Now, the hardest part of this is punching the holes. I'll be perfectly honest with you and say that if we were not doing this on camera and if I could make a lot of noise, I would take this out to my garage and I would use an electric drill, or I'd use a hammer and a nail. That way you can get through all the pieces of paper at once and you don't have to worry about it. Now, the traditional way to do it is to take an awl, like a big hardware awl or sewing awl. Can I find mine? No. So I'm going to go for my personal preference, which you guys saw. Yes, gotta stop using guys. That's too gender specific, which you all saw in our Sakura special, which was last month. Clean it out a little bit. This is my Japanese screw punch. The biggest problem with it is that it does tend to clog up the nozzle. So because I was using it earlier today, let me clean it out, get all the loose paper out of there. Having your needle can be very helpful for cleaning this thing out. You do have to do the cleaning it out every couple of pages worth of punching. But again, just to remind you what this particular tool is, this is just labeled as a screw punch. It is the Japanese style screw punch, not to be confused with this, which is a European style screw punch. This one happens to be from Martha Stewart. I find that this is not really the best brand. The bits go kind of dull on you fairly quick. I do have one from Japan somewhere upstairs in my giant mess of a studio. I know Claudia has seen my studio and knows how crazy it is. This screw punch has 3 different size bits to it, one of which I've apparently lost in last month's show, still on the desk here. So they have 3 different size holes that you can punch. I am currently using the smallest size hole. How to know which size hole you need to punch will be based on whatever thread you have, and it needs to be 3 times the width of your thread. So you need to be able to pass the thread through 3 times, and that will be the size hole you need. We'll talk about the thread in just a minute. I may be getting a little bit backwards, but there's thread options as well. I'm just happen to use the smallest size of the screw punches that came with it. Yeah, Claudia, I can imagine what your studio is like. It's probably just as bad as mine. I was saying to our director before we started the show, I've been doing these shows for a year now, and I keep bringing stuff. My studio is right up here. I keep bringing stuff down to do these shows, and then I don't take it back up. So now there's this pile around me. It's about this high. It looks like an episode of Hoarders, and it's all of our previous episodes, whether it was on the Oita channel or on the Okashicon channel, all the crafts that I've done online for the past year, all the supplies are right here around me. Remember the food coloring that we played with in November? It's here. The Sashiko, it's all here. So I am now at the point where I can't find things anymore. So my actual Japanese screw punch can't find it. It's crazy. So where was I? I think I'm just about to punch some holes, aren't I? Was that where I was at? Now remind me if that's not where I'm at. I am taking this screw punch. Again, traditional technique is to use an awl. You can use a nail, a hammer and a nail. If you had a piece of wood, super easy. And in fact, when we get to the side sewn book, much more convenient. And the power drill, much more convenient. But yeah, the hole just needs to be 3 times the size of your thread, whatever thread size you have, then that'll determine the hole you have. If you have an awl that is a tapered shape, you just stop when you get to a certain point. Honestly, it's not really a big problem if the hole is a little bit too big. You just don't want it enormous. You don't want it to be like 7 times the size of your thread so that it's swimming around in there. But generally speaking, if you have a screw punch, it works. You do have to punch a couple of times to get through 5 sheets of paper. So I'll be sitting here, and you'll see this. It's actually better if I stand up, but then it looks really weird on camera. So give me a second. I just kind of drill through here a couple of times. Whoops. And then I get off. Wow, I really messed that up. I get off and put it in all kinds of strange places. Punch holes where they're not supposed to be. There we go. There's my holes through there. And some bonus holes that I didn't need. It's okay. They're only on the inside. Here we go. Next hole. Again, it's easier if you're standing up and you can put pressure on it. If it doesn't want to go through the first time or the first couple times, I find that handmade paper, that is my decorative paper here, often doesn't want to punch. So I can barely see where that was. If I line up my bit directly where that was and punch on the other side, that can sometimes get it through. You probably can't see, well, you can see on camera. That's where the holes are. Come back over here, do it for my middle hole. Again, a couple of times, punches through more or less. Sometimes if you just take your pen, you can poke it through, but not with this decorative paper. Poke it back through this side and get that hole going. I did tell you this is the most tedious part of the entire project, and I was not lying to you. Again, power tools will really save you at this point. I actually managed to turn the book over in the process, but that makes it so that you can see it a little bit easier on the camera. Dig through a couple times, poke through, turn over. Let's see if I can see where that hole. Oh, I can't even see where that one was. I thought about pre-drilling those holes. Oh, I see I'm making the camera shake. Thought about pre-drilling those holes, but then that would make it look a little bit too easy. And I don't want you to have an unrealistic expectation, because it's honestly not that difficult. Sorry about the shaking. I hope this doesn't make anybody too seasick. Let's see if you can see through this side. Nope, can't quite see through there. And here's our final hole. I hope that's lined up. I think that's lined up. There we go. There, we have 5 holes and some bonus holes. You can barely not see. Ignore the bonus holes. Now, the second hardest bit, which is getting the thread into the needle. This drives me nuts, and you'll probably have the same situation. The thread that you will use, Claudia, I don't know what you're talking about with the glitter, but yeah, the glitter is getting everywhere. It's absolutely all over. It's all over me, and I've already showered and changed clothes once. So yeah, that's why my hair was wet, because I had glitter in it. Anyway, the thread that you may want to use. The traditional bookbinding thread is a waxed linen. And if you go online and you search for bookbinding thread, you can buy a wonderful spool of waxed linen, and it's fantastic. And it will serve you for many, 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 many bookmaking purposes. You know, dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of books. I don't happen to have a waxed linen thread, and I don't know that they had linen in Japan, but I do happen to have a waxed hemp cord. These are used for like jewelry, macrame jewelry. As you can see, it was $5 for this enormous spool of thread. I've had it for, gosh, 6, 7, 8 years, used it for many projects. I've still barely put a dent in it. You can use embroidery floss. The reason why it's helpful to be waxed, the glitter probably makes a hole punching hard. Yes, I think it does. I think the glitter is not helping with the hole punching, but also just because this is a handmade paper, it's got a very different texture, and it doesn't, and it's a slightly heavier weight. Anyway, back to the thread. You can use an embroidery floss. You can use like a thin yarn, like a crochet cotton or something like that. I would go ahead and wax it. So if you have beeswax or you have a candle that you maybe don't want, just rub the thread on the candle or on the beeswax. If you have a friend who's into quilting, maybe you have a product called Thread Heaven, same concept. It's just, if you stiffen the cord a little bit, it can make it a little easier to work with. And also it'll glide through the paper a little more easily, and it won't tear up the paper or the thread. I mean, it's not very likely to tear up the paper or the thread, but it's less likely if it's waxed. So take whatever thread you have, and I generally, for a pamphlet stitch, like 3 times the length of my project and then a little bit more. So I just unroll it. Remember that when you are cutting your thread, you can always cut off if you have too much. You cannot go back and stick on extra if you don't have enough. So err on the side of generosity, not the side of stinginess. If you only have a certain amount of thread, I would pick another thread. If you're short on thread, just let me know. I got plenty. I'll send you some. Now, the hardest part, the really, really, I swear, the hardest part is getting this thread and this needle to go together. Now, this particular cord is round, is a little bit round, and most eyes of needles are flat. I had a bigger needle. I happen to be using a tapestry needle. You can also use a crewel needle. Any needle that has got an eye big enough to get your cord through, more or less, is going to be good enough. And in fact, with the pamphlet stitch book, I'll be honest, you don't necessarily need a needle. It's just a little helpful. But I have a tip if your thread is, again, too round for the eye of the needle, and that is to take your screw punch, your awl, your whatever it is you're using, and just kind of flatten it out. I know that this has a little bit of a black coating to it, so I'm not going to do it directly on the paper in case I stain the paper. But I'm just going to smash this. Sorry about the noise. And get that a little bit flatter. Now, again, it's going to take me a while. I've got the shakes. I'm going to suggest that if you guys, stop using the word guys, if y'all are not wanting to watch me sit here and thread this, that you make comments in the chat, or you go create a Twitch account. Because, ooh, look at that fire background going on there. Fire! I tell you, this is boring. I'm terrible at this. I don't know why we're on fire. I think the director is telling me this is the most boring part of the entire show. I believe it. It is, this is like watching paint dry, isn't it? Remember, you always want to put the needle onto the thread rather than the thread onto the needle. And it really, would a needle threader make it easier? Yes, if your needle threader is big enough for the cord that you're using. My needle threaders that I have are not. I may have one back behind me. Do y'all wanna pause a second while I go grab into my Sashiko stash and see if I can find a needle threader? Because that might make this whole process faster. Except I keep dropping the cord as well. I'll be right back. Thank you, director. We had, I'm going to switch to a different thread. The explosion was from our New Year's Eve party. That was the coin licking thing is a needle threader. This is also a needle puller. I've got a bunch of things all around my house. I'm going to switch to a different cord just because I don't want you guys to have to sit here and watch me thread the needle the entire time. I have this beautiful bright pink cord that I got in Japan. It is an embroidery floss. I will use a couple of strands of it put together. You still hopefully be able to see. That is my fault for dropping that needle earlier. That's why it's pretty important to find the right needle in advance. So because I'm going to multi-strand this, I'm going to hold two strands of it together. I'm going to need 6 times 3, 4, 5, 6 and a bit. Now I can very easily thread this needle, and then I'm going to knot the 2 strands together. Wow, it does show up pretty well on camera, even though this is a tiny little thread. This is a nylon thread. Try not to step on it. I'm trying to step on anything. I still have the shakes. This is still the worst part of every presentation, isn't it? I had really tried to thread this earlier, and that's when things went really awry. So needle onto the thread, not thread onto the needle. When I have a needle that fits my thread, look, I'm not that bad. Y'all, I gotta organize my studio. I have a friend. Everybody needs one of these friends. If you're in the Austin area, I will introduce you to her. She is a hospice nurse by trade, and the way she de-stresses is by organizing other people's houses. Yeah, I mean that. I mean, she comes to your house and organizes it, and doesn't charge. But it's just her de-stress mechanism, and she has already organized my studio once, and I need to have her come do it again. Okay, I've got 2. She is amazing. She's fantastic. She also sews all of her own clothes. She sews her scrubs. She's for those of you who've been in my house or have been when I've done some of my presentations in my dining room, you probably don't remember, but I have the IKEA cat curtains, and she takes the IKEA curtains and makes skirts and dresses out of them. So those ones with all the cat faces on them, she has made a dress out of it. It's fantastic. Anyway, back to the project. This is the thread that is approximately 3 times the size of our paper. This is our project that is still being held together. Now, you have 2 choices. This is your main artistic design decision at this point. You can either, let me show you this original. You can either leave your dangling cords on the outside and add beads to it, which is what they did for this particular binding, or you can have it hidden on the inside. Because it's going to be a little bit easier for me to show you, I'm going to have the tails on the inside just for the sake of the camera. Normally, I like having them on the outside. But you're going to start here in the middle. And it can be a little bit hard to find where you're going. Oops, I decided that's right. I was going to leave the tails on the inside. So you want to leave yourself a little bit of this tail so that you can tie the knot at the end. Now, it is entirely up to you. You can just hold it or tie a really big knot. I find sometimes it's easier, especially while I'm trying to do it on camera and I have the shakes from the hypoglycemia. Just take a tiny piece of washi tape, some of my beautiful Sakura washi tape, and just hold it in place that way. And it's not going to slip out while you're doing it. Now, the things that you need to remember while you're doing the stitching, it's very basic. You have these, every time that you have a hole, you have a gap that needs to be filled on the front and on the back or the outside. So anytime you see a gap, that's what you're going to be heading for. So in this case, I've got my thread poking on the outside. I can either go up or down. It really doesn't matter. Just pick one and then you'll work your way to the other side. I happen to like going down, but it really doesn't make a difference. It's going to be symmetrical at the end. So I just pick the next hole, poke the needle through this way. Now, you want to keep your thread taut but not tight. You don't want it pulling so that you're making any buckles in the paper. You also don't want to pull it like I did so hard that the tail comes out. So again, taut so that the thread like here lies flat, but not to the point where it's tugging the paper in ways you don't want it to tug. So you've pulled it up through one hole. It's coming up this way now. Now you just pick this next hole, go down. And again, taut, but not tight. And so you've got this here is covered, but you'll see you've got gaps all on this side. You've got to close up that gap. So you're just going to pull your thread back through this way. Pretty simple. I told you this one was not too bad. You're always going to be checking your tension as you're going along. So keep pulling. Now again, you've got another gap. Fill that up. Pretty simple. If you have two threads, remember you have to pull both of them. Find the next hole. This one didn't poke through quite as well, but it was pre-cut. I just had to get the extra bits out. Flip it back over. Your next hole up. You also need to bear in mind, it's not as much of a problem while I have this thin thread, but when you're using a thicker cord, like a bookbinding cord or a hemp cord, you never want to stitch through your thread. That will weaken the thread and eventually will reduce the longevity of the book. So always make sure that you're going in and out of the hole, but you're not stitching through the thread at any point. And again, we are coming back. We are filling up this gap that we have left. Sticking that through there. At this point, you can go ahead and remove the clips if they're in your way. You don't need them. The book is pretty much done at this point. And now we are at the end. Remember, everything needs to be taut but not tight. You're going to untape your end here. I'm going to go ahead and cut this so that I've got about the same amount on both ends. And then you're going to go ahead and tie a square knot. Remember to have all of your strands together. And again, keep saying taut but not tight. Taut but not tight. And see if I can grab all the strands together. Okay, I had to turn this sideways because it's hard for me to do up and down. And you want this knot to land over that hole if at all possible. It's not really a problem if it doesn't. And this is where you really need to make sure that it is pulled correctly. And we are done. You can go ahead. I would probably add an additional square knot here. If it were up to me. Now that is still a little loose, but it's not going to be a huge problem. That can work its way out. You can clip this down a little more. Oops, did not tie that very well. Make sure that that is tied down the way you want it. In fact, let me start over on that knot. Let's see, anything else? I see a lot of you are sitting there and not commenting, which is okay. I still appreciate you. I appreciate everyone who spends their time with us on these Monday evenings. Remember, next month we are going to be talking about origami jewelry. We'll also be doing some kawaii earrings based on found objects. In my case, it's going to be gachapon capsules. You'll know I love my gachapon, and I have plenty of spare capsules. So just get that knot in there. You can cut your ends. I wouldn't cut it too short. You could use a little dab of glue if you wanted to. That is not traditional, but it can secure the knot a little bit. If you had left this on the outside, obviously you could have a tassel or add some beading, but otherwise we have finished the pamphlet stitch book. See, that was pretty easy. I probably could do with using the bone folder and smooshing this down a little bit after it's finished, just so that it lays a little flatter. But there we go. First book done. That is 2 pamphlet sewn books. Do we have any questions about the pamphlet stitch books? If not, I'm going to start moving on to the side sewn binding. The side sewn binding is very, very similar, except because there are more pages, it takes longer for me to do the hole punching. So I may skimp and only do a few pages on there just to save you guys all of the, save y'all the time. I really got to stop doing that. Now, I gave you the supply list for this as well. In this case, it is, I have 8 to 10 pieces of paper. In the cover of this, the pamphlet stitch book, this was just some decorative scrapbooking paper. It happens to be 100% recycled paper that has screen printing and glitter on it. Now there's glitter all over me, my house, my desk, everything. In this case, when we are doing the side sewn binding, I have some plain cardstock that I have already cut down to the size of the folded paper. So this is copy paper, this is cardstock. It's a much heavier weight. What you can do to make this look nicer is then go ahead and get your decorative paper, maybe you were with us when we dyed paper back in November. If not, please go back at our YouTube, and it should hopefully be on our Okashicon website, where you can go to our November episode where we dyed paper with food coloring. You can go ahead and take this and then use a little bit of PVA glue, like Elmer's glue or a glue stick, and attach it to your cardstock if you want it to be more interesting. Or you can decorate your cardstock before you start with the stitching, whatever you like. But in this case, you want it to be a little heavier, just a little bit more durability. You don't have to, though. We have bought some books in a museum store, the Hokusai Museum, where the cover weight was, this paper was the same as the interior of the book. So it really isn't essential to have a heavier one. It's just a little bit more durable. So just to remind you what we have for the supplies, we have 1 piece of cardstock. You can use, if you want to upcycle a cereal box, or I wouldn't use something as heavy as like a cardboard box for mailing, but a thin cardboard would be fine. Scrapbook cardstock is absolutely perfect for this. Anything, watercolor paper, anything that's a little bit heavier, mixed media paper, Bristol board, any of that's fine. And then for the interior, again, I'm using copy paper because that's what's handy. We found out recently that the price to buy 3 reams of copy paper is about $2 more than 1 ream of copy paper if you're ordering online. So we now have a huge assortment of copy paper I'm trying to work through. We do not do that much printing in our house, but when you need paper, you need paper. You can use the really thin rice paper. If you wanted to be practicing your Japanese calligraphy, you can use watercolor paper. If you wanted to use this as a travel sketchbook, watercolor sketchbook, mixed media paper is especially good for art journaling as well. So whatever paper you happen to like. Now, for the purpose of a side sewn book, which is what we're doing now, again, I'll show you this example, the purchased example, and the one I did earlier today. You actually don't have to have folded paper. In fact, most of the tutorials that you will see online will tell you to cut the paper first. They will not tell you to fold it. They would tell you to go ahead and cut all the pages to the half size or the quarter size or whatever size you're going to be working with. But I found when I actually bought a book, these pages are actually folded in half. I don't know if you can see without me tipping out. I don't want to tip out the pressed flowers in there, but let me see if I can open up. These are actually pre-folded, so it's completely open inside of each page, and that prevents the ink from bleeding through, and it's also what makes it really great for me pressing flowers. Again, to show you, I've got dogwood, sakura, azalea, more sakura. Anytime I find a cool flower, I bought this 2 years ago, and anytime I was in Japan, found a cool flower, I just shoved it in there and squashed it, and that was that. I was going to show you one thing, just to show you what I'm not going to show you tonight. If you thought we were doing this type of bookbinding, which is a Coptic stitch, this is not what we're doing tonight. I could teach you this, but this requires a lot more tension effort, and so I really like to teach this hands-on in person. We are hopefully going to be able to do hands-on classes starting in the fall, but obviously that's pandemic willing. I can't give you any guarantees, but if you would like to learn Coptic stitch binding, I'll show you again. It's obviously the name like Coptic stitch. This is an Egyptian style, not a Japanese style, but if you'd like to learn it, it does give you a book that can lay open flat. Then these are actually like little, one thing I forgot to say when we were making the pamphlet stitch book is that when you have pages that are together and then you're going to stitch a section together, that is called a signature. And a bunch of signatures sewn together is what a Coptic stitch book is. So a lot of people who do handmade or hand book binding will do something like a Coptic stitch. And if you have look at historical books that have leather covers on them and they have little ridges on the spine, that's because of this type of stitching. But it did originate in Egypt, 1500, 2000 years ago. It was holding together papyrus at the time. But we're going to do the Japanese sewn binding. I love the term stab binding. They do often call it a stab binding because, again, if you have an awl or you're using a hammer and a nail, you are stabbing through the paper. And although that makes you a little bit queasy when I do that to my desk, it is so satisfying. So again, I really recommend, if you are not trying to do this live on camera, hi to the additional people who have just come in. Please do make a Twitch account and leave comments if you have questions. We are on book number 2 for the night, which is going to be our final book for the evening, which is the Japanese side sewn binding. We already completed the pamphlet stitch binding. You guys can go back and watch on our replay afterwards. But the reason why we're doing this one is this is a Japanese technique, and the show is about Japanese craft techniques. So I think I've more than adequately covered all that. But back to the supply list for this one. You've got 2 pieces of cardstock. You've got some pieces of paper that are pre-folded. You will have the choice if you want to stitch on the folded side or if you want to stitch on the open side, so that your pages will either be like double thickness if you're stitching the folded side out, or single thickness if you're stitching from the other way. It is entirely up to you. Depends on what you're planning to use the book for. It really does not make a difference. And in fact, if these were all completely single sheets, maybe again your freezer paper or wax paper because you're using it for a sticker collection or a washi tape collection, totally fine to have single sheets. Or you can have, pieces that you've already, done artwork on and you just want to do the binding. Remember that the binding in this case does take up about 1/2 inch of the paper. So if you have maybe postcards or things like that that you don't want to hide a portion of, then that might not be the best thing to sew into this type of binding. But if you have artwork that you're doing it in advance, you can obviously create your drawings or whatever on this part of the paper and then leave the space empty for a binding and then collate it all together as a collection later. Very, very forgiving, very, very flexible, whatever you like to do. Now, again, the hard part is the drilling the holes. So much better with power tools. But since we're not using power tools tonight, let me show you how to do this the hard way. I am going to cheat, and I'm only going to do the covers and 2 folded pieces of paper, because otherwise you'd be sitting here watching me drill holes all night, and no one wants to do that. Now, to figure out the spaces between the holes, it's the exact same measurements as we had for the pamphlet stitch. But we're going to measure in a 1/2 inch first. It's generally good to use a template. I have a piece of scrap paper here. Do not lose that needle. Do not lose my thread. I have a piece of scrap paper. This happens to be a piece of cardstock, piece of paper, envelope, whatever. Really doesn't matter. As long as it has the same length as your finished paper size, that's fine. I'm going to measure in a 1/2 inch, because the binding is usually 1/2 inch, no matter how big your paper is. Now, it can be, if it's very small, this is like 1 centimeter. So that's about 3/8 of an inch, but when you have a bigger piece, it goes about 1/2 an inch. You can go up to 1 inch if you have a really large piece of paper. Say you've got something that's the whole size of this this cutting mat, then you would go maybe an inch, inch and a half. Sorry, I don't think in metric. If you need a conversion, let me know. But you know, my brain works in imperial because I'm a horrible American. Anyway, I'm going to measure in a couple places 1/2 an inch so that I can draw a line. It's generally a good idea to measure in at least 3 places so that you get your line pretty square. Now, if you had 2, you could be off, but if you had 3, you're more likely to be, you know, in parallel to your edge. Again, I am using an erasable pen, but for a template, it doesn't matter if you want to do it directly on your cover or your book, then use an erasable, something erasable like a pencil or erasable pen, whatever it is. See if I can get these. Yay! Now I go back and I erase where I made the mistake, and I also erase those dots that I used for drawing the line because I don't want to get confused. They are roughly where I want them, but not 100% where I want them. So once again, we're going to measure in 1/2 an inch from the top. That is about 1.5 centimeters, and 1/2 an inch from the bottom. We are going to go find the center of the whole page, which in this case is 4 1/4. I want it to be on that line, and then we're going to go ahead and measure that 1 7/8 inch in between these 2 holes. So the exact same measurements as the last book, and in fact, if you have a template that you made for the last book, you can go ahead and line it up and draw your dots on this way. And it is a nice cheaty way. If you made a template for your pamphlet stitch book, you use the same template. That's why I like using the same size paper, because it's a nice cheater way to do it. If they don't line up with your line, just go ahead and draw so that these are now all on the line. I now punch the holes in the template. Because I'm not using power tools, I will have to cut these pages separately, a couple at a time. You can only really do 1 or 2 pieces of paper at once before the screw punch really starts messing up on you. And as a result, having a template means that you're gonna hopefully get all your holes aligned each time the first time. Go ahead and poke those through where they didn't 100% want to go through. I should probably clean out my screw punch at this point because it got full punching the last bits. Do we have any questions while I'm doing this? Just making the template. Once you've made this template, you can reuse it infinite number of times. You can keep making, as long as you're making the same height book, you can always use this template. Also, with the side sewn binding, it does not have to be an odd number of holes. You can do an even number of holes. There is a wonderful show on Creative Bug, which is a paid craft teaching website that is owned by Joanne Crafts. And the lady there does a fantastic version of a couple of the different bindings. So I'm just looking for that needle. I told you I lost the needle already. The needle is really helpful for cleaning out the screw punch, as I said earlier. Anyway, she does a 4-hole version. Some of the other bindings, so they get quite fancy and elaborate. Some of them have, you know, extra holes that are punched in the corners. Some of them have extra holes so that you can make zigzags. There, you can get much more elaborate versions of a side sewn binding. So this is, again, just the very beginner. But once you have made a template for any of these, you can use that same template over and over for that type of binding. Just cardstock. The reason why I don't like this Martha Stewart punch as much as the Japanese one is it does dull down a lot faster. And the way to sharpen it is to get a big thick stack of aluminum foil and keep punching, screwing through it, and that is supposed to sharpen it a little. I don't know how well that works. I've never tried, but in any case, that's what all the professional advice says to do to sharpen bits like that. I imagine you could use a drill bit, but that wouldn't punch a hole. That you wouldn't really want to do it on a cutting mat. You'd want to have like a wooden surface or something, scrap wood underneath it. Claudia, you've never made a template before? That's interesting because I can't really punch through all of these at once. If I were to try to, get the holes in the same place every time, I would either be drawing out this on every piece of paper, which would take a long time, or my holes would get askew from one to the other. In fact, I said I made one earlier this afternoon to show you. I made two earlier this afternoon, and one of them went very, very wrong because of that. Because I didn't have a template the first time. I thought, I've made this book dozens of times before. I don't need a template. Yeah, that's what hubris will get you every time. So I have my piece of cardstock. And again, you've noticed a piece of cardstock, I cannot do more than one layer. The screw punch will not go through it. I've got my template lined up exactly flush. I can stick this bit directly where the previous hole was. It will kind of give it a little guide. And hopefully these are going to punch through the first time. I should be using more pressure, but I'm kind of shaky and I don't want to get these out of alignment. These didn't quite punch through, but hopefully, I don't know if you can see. I can tell where those holes were. So I don't need the template at this point. I can just go back directly with the screw punch. And now I can be sure that it is going all the way through. One thing I do like about the screw punch, it is very easy to line back up again as long as you're kind of paying attention. It's also easy to get out of alignment if you're not paying attention. Again, ask me how I know. I'm really good at that. And then I just like having the same pen or pencil to poke these holes through. These little confetti bits will get everywhere. And it's a bit like the glitter. You just kind of have to deal with it. So that is one. I don't know if y'all would have preferred if I do some of these as a, here's one I prepared earlier. So you don't have to sit and watch me do this 4 times. Or if you prefer knowing exactly how long it takes. So let me know. I know there are several of you paying attention. So I would really appreciate your opinion on, see, I wasn't paying attention there. I shouldn't say paying attention and then not pay attention. If you would rather I pre-drill these pieces so that you don't have to sit here and watch, I can do that for future episodes. Certainly, we will also be using this screw punch or a European screw punch next month when we're doing origami jewelry, because we do need to poke holes into the finished origami in order to add jewelry findings into things. So if you haven't taken an opportunity to purchase some kind of screw punch, I would recommend it. I would really recommend if you find a proper Japanese one, if you can. Okay, like cooking shows, you like watching all the work. I do too. I find like when I'm watching quilt programs, especially my mom is a really big fan of Fawns and Porter. And they're like, oh, and here's the step that I did previously. And it makes it look like it takes 30 seconds when really they spent 2 hours doing it. And I kind of like to know how long the whole process takes. Clean out this screw punch again. The bigger holes on the screw punch don't get clogged quite as easily as this tiny hole. But I think it's just a design flaw in this Martha Stewart drill bit. Again, this doesn't happen nearly as much on the proper Japanese one. The proper Japanese one is somewhere up in my studio and I don't know where it is. I should order another one, huh? That is how you turn into a hoarder, isn't it? You can't find it and then you just order another one, but it's it's never, I feel like tools are one thing you just can't have too many of, because when I teach classes live, somebody won't have this, you know. I am just going to try to do these two. These are now copy paper, again, the same size. I'm going to try to do 2 sheets of copy paper, so 4 total layers. Again, you want it to be nice and flush, because that is where your holes won't line up. If you don't get your template aligned properly, then you will also not be able to stitch properly through the holes. But I think I can get through 4 layers of copy paper. If not, I will hopefully just be able to flip it over and come through the back. There's a very strange sound outside. Hope it's not an accident. Okay. And those more or less poked through. They didn't go all the way, but I can see from this side. So let me line these back up. So again, if you are doing, because this book binding technique does not have a limit like the pamphlet stitch book did, you're not limited to 20 or 30 pages. You could probably do 50 or 100 pieces of paper. If you're trying to do it with a manual tool of any kind, whether it's a screw punch and awl, anything like that, it will take several repeats of the process to punch holes through all the different pages. Power drill. If I had a power drill, I would take the whole selection, I would clamp it all together, and then just drill through the whole thing. Now in this case, I want to make sure that all my holes are fully punched through and all lined up. And right now, I'm holding up to the light. It looks like one of these is not all the way through. So just go ahead and grab that last hole there. See if I can get it. There we go. Come back to this side. So this is the point where you finished all your paper and you finished your cardstock, and you want to hold it up to a light source. In my case, I have one over here, just to be sure that you can see through all of the holes. Now, that was the hardest bit. Again, hello, Misty. What are you saying? You like to know how easy or hard it is? Yeah, I do too. It may be a little boring for this part, and certainly whenever I spruce these up to eventually do on YouTube later, I mean, we do put the raw version of this up on YouTube, but in the future, I'd like to edit it down, and maybe I'll fast forward through this part so you see the work, but yet you don't have to spend 4 or 5 minutes of your life just watching nothing but me using a screw punch. I don't know. I don't know what I'll do with that. So again, you have a choice here of whether you want your tail to go on the outside of the book or the inside of the book. I like on this one to put it on the outside of the book because it's easier for you to watch. Because you are sewing now not just through these holes, but you're going around the edge and the top and the bottom, I like to make the thread 4 times the length of the book. That may be too much, but again, you always want to have too much rather than too little. So because I have this thin thread that I want to double, I really want 8 times. So 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Use my scissors. I don't think I put scissors in the supply list, but hopefully we all have scissors by now. Go ahead. I'm sure I will be able to thread this needle much easier because it is the correct size thread for the correct size needle. I'm shaking a little, but first time. See, I'm not as incompetent as sometimes I feel like. Now, again, because I want this thread to be completely doubled, this is, by the way, not waxed thread. So if I really wanted this particular book to last longer and to be a little bit easier to stitch through, I would go find beeswax, find a beeswax candle or something at this point, and I would run the thread through a beeswax and then run your hands on it like this. Natalie Channon of Alabama Channon, which I don't know if you're familiar with Alabama Channon. It is a garment making studio in Alabama. It's thus the name. And they hand make all of their garments out of organic cotton, and they're hand sewn and they are hand embroidered. And she calls the process loving the thread. So you take the thread and the wax and you just would run your hands. You get the oils from your fingers. It's getting any of the kinks out of the floss, especially if it's been on a card like this instead of round spool. And it's just called loving the thread. And it makes the thread a lot straighter and it's less likely to tangle on you. Now, again, if you have a pre-waxed cord, you don't have to worry about that. So in this case, again, I'm going to start from the outside and I am going to start in the middle. You always want to start these books in the middle. And I'm going to leave a tail once again on the outside. Let's see. The struggle is real when you're shaking. I know you said Claudia, you really had problems with the shaking after the vaccine, and Timmy is really, really bad. He's a lot worse than I am with the shakes. I still have a little bit of the shakes, but not nearly as bad as Timmy's been. Now, there are two ways to finish off this binding when we get to the tying part. You can either have the tie on the outside of the book, or the way I was always taught, let me grab this, is to have the tie just here on the front of the book. And that really just depends on how you tie it at the end. But either way, I'm going to start in the same way that I did before, except I should have clipped my pages together. This clipping, I did say, was optional. It's helpful, but it's not mandatory. Clip my pages together just to make it a little easier to stitch. But this is my tail. It's just stitched there so that I know where it is later. It doesn't matter if you start the front, the back. At this point, there is no front or back, and it absolutely makes no difference. This is going to be a very, very similar stitch to what you did on the pamphlet stitch. You're going to try not to get it caught in your scissors. Top tip there. And again, you're going to go through the hole, and you're going to make sure that you never sew through the threads. And again, you want taut, but not tight. And you not only this time do you have these gaps in between these holes, but you've got to stitch on the sides, the top, and the bottom. So in this case, I came up through the middle. That was my tail, came up through the middle, went down to the next hole. And now the difference is we're going to come back around. We're going to loop all the way around the side there. Hopefully you saw that. You will definitely see what I mean as soon as I pull this. You have looped around the side. Now, tension becomes important on this book, much more so than the pamphlet stitch, because otherwise these will get loose and kind of wonky. But we are back on this side where we came out. One of the reasons why it's helpful to have the clips is just so that you don't have to worry as you flip it over whether things are getting out of alignment. Again, always holding this taut as best you can. Go down to this next hole. Again, you can go up or down. It really doesn't matter. Just pick the next hole over and wrap around the side. Now we have finished this side bit. Again, always pulling it taut, but not tight. Now we have to do this edge. And you're like, well, how do I want to do it? Do I want to wrap around the bottom, or do I come back again? You just have to figure out where you're going next. So in this case, because I've come out this hole, I'm just going to go back up the other side. You don't really have to stop and think about it if you just figure, well, I came out on one side, I need to wrap around to the other side. But if you get confused, you just look at where the space that is missing. So in this case, this is finished, but flip over, and this space is now what is empty. So you pull back to this one. And again, taut, but not tight. Now, that's already got a thread in it. This one is empty. So we go back here. Taut, but not tight. You just keep saying that over and over and over. I like having a really contrasting thread on these. You can absolutely do a coordinating thread if you don't want to show. There is no, it is just completely an artistic decision. Now in this case, you're already on this side. So although there's no stitching on this side or that side, since the thread has come out this side, you're just going to continue on this side and go back down. So I don't know if you had sewing cards when you were little. I certainly did, maybe because my mom was a home ec teacher. But, you know, they're basically just like playing cards that had huge holes punched in them, and then you had a shoelace. And this is very, very much like sewing cards for children. When my nieces were born, I tried to find them made commercially, and I just couldn't. So I had to make some for them. But I think that's a skill that we should go back to teaching our toddlers. Again, pulling that. You can always go back and adjust some of these tensions and pull them a little bit more as you're going along. If you find that it's gotten loose, just keep pulling on it. You can take your needle under there and nudge a little. Okay, now is where my shaking is really starting to be a thing. If you've got too much laxity in your thread, just pull it up with the needle and then tug. You can pull it that way and then pull this way and then pull up again and flip it back over the other side. It helps if you do this as you're going along rather than waiting until you're done. Because if you wait until you're done to try to fix it, sometimes it's just a lot more fiddly. You can wait until you're done, and you can fix it when you're nearly done. There's no finished until you've completely tied off and cut the thread. So again, we've come up on this side. We're going to go around. So we're going back that way. Honestly, these side bits are what are essential to holding the book together, to giving it this look. Now, we've got an open space here. Got an open space there. We're not going back. We're going all the way down one side and then coming our way back down, same as we did on the pamphlet stitch book. Now, once again, go back up and around on the side. Try not to drop your needle unless you're shaky. And if you're shaky, then I feel you. Absolutely feel you. So I'm now going around the side. If I were to make a mistake here, and if I were to mess up and put it on the end instead, it doesn't matter. I could just go back again and pick up this side. It's exactly the same stitch. It really doesn't make a difference. So you can do the top or the side. It's best to be consistent about it, but no one's going to know. Now we've got an empty space where we've pulled up on the top. We've got an empty space here. We're just going to fill that gap again. Now I got caught in the corner. You don't want to get caught in the corner because you're still, again, trying to get everything taut but not tight. We have one final gap, and that gap is here to the side seam of the binding. Now what I like to do is to go ahead and go back into this hole so that the threads come out on the side. So you can see this is coming out this way. What we did with the pamphlet stitches, we went ahead and tied it right there. You can tie it right there, but if you want to have a nice little decorative bubble or a bead on the outside edge, sometimes it's better to go ahead and tie your knot on the edge of the book. So look, that looks a little bit loose there. I haven't pulled things tight enough. This is where I need to make sure that my tension is correct. It's not difficult, it just requires paying attention to your tension. This will be a double thickness of thread here if you choose to do it this way. So you really want to make sure that the tension is similar between both of them so that they kind of nest on top of each other. And keeping the tension while you're tying the knot is probably the most difficult part of the bind off, especially when you've got two threads you're holding together. If you have just one cord, it's obviously just as simple as tying a regular square knot. But we are almost done. We're in the home stretch. Make sure everything is taut and then finish that last bit of that square knot. Cut off your cords. Once again, you can use a tiny dab of glue if you want. You can leave a big long tail so that you can add beads. Remove your clips, and your side sewn book is complete. That's it. I see that you're saying sell cards at teacher stores. I didn't see what you were talking about there, but yeah, they certainly sell a lot. Oh, sewing cards. That is a great tip. I didn't know that. Anyway, we have finished. We have finished our pamphlet stitch book. We have finished our side sewn book. Again, remember there are different techniques that you can build on after you learn a side sewn book. They just have fancier stitching and more holes, but they all use the exact same principles that we have already learned. So go ahead and put the camera on me. I don't think we need the camera down here anymore. So if you have any questions, this is your last time to ask me. If not, I really appreciate you all being with me tonight. Thank you so much for coming to Okashicon Online. I hope that this has made your Monday a little bit better. My hair is now dry, and we are all, and I still have glitter on me again, so I will just have to live with glitter for the next couple of days because I'm not washing again. But yeah, it was bad this afternoon. There's glitter everywhere. It was crazy. So tip I would give you is probably don't use glitter on your books unless you really want to be disco-y for the next couple of days anyway, because you know you can still shower and then you still have glitter on you. Like, it doesn't matter how many times. The glitter is everywhere. Hope you enjoy your new books. You made these yourself. You can go and make them 100 times, and you can make them for your friends. Now, I will say one thing I didn't mention. On the side sewn book, some people like to go ahead and fold back the cover and make a pre-fold on here using your bone folder or your ruler. I personally don't like doing that, but you can. If you like to write in your book and maybe you want it to fold a little bit flatter, go ahead and pre-crease just right along this seam. Go ahead and score just outside of that seam so it'll open back up again. But that is it. I personally don't do that. You do whatever you like. Autograph bookmaking, great idea. Again, if you go to Japan, and I highly recommend that you do, they have the coolest little stamp things everywhere. Limited edition ones. Every single metro station in Tokyo, I didn't know this until I'd been there for quite some time. This is actually a cable car in Hakone going up Mount Fuji. This is a garden that I went to, Hamarikyu Gardens. You can see the date that I was there even. They have a beautiful tea house. Now, I will say that if you do go to temples and you are collecting, temples and shrines, and you're collecting the goshuin, which are the stamps to prove that you have prayed to that temple, it's sort of like a pilgrim shrine badge that you would have in the West. It's basically to prove that you've been on a pilgrimage to particular places. That is a different type of book, which I can teach you. But to be honest, it's more about buying the right supplies, and the making it is very simple. So yeah, it is an accordion book, and it's buying the accordion text block and then just slapping some covers on the outside of it. But it's just a gluing activity. It's nothing that fancy, but you can make your own. My husband and I did in Kyoto. So for our next trip, we are all ready with our brand new handmade goshuins, Goshuin Cho, which is the book for collecting goshuin. So that is certainly something that I can teach you in the future if you would like to know, along with the Coptic stitch binding. Once we are able to get together again in the future, in real life space, we can make all kinds of books. That I've only begun to scratch the surface of my bookbinding. Hello, Muse. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you were with us tonight. For all of you who have been with us for Okashicon Online, thank you so much. As you know, Okashicon is not having a live conference this year, but we are going to have some very special activities, including a very full day of Japan-related content coming up in July. But don't forget that Sunday at 2 o'clock Central Time, I'm going to be talking about traveling in Japan with disabilities and people who have accessibility needs, with special guest Josh Grisdale of Accessible Japan, who you've probably seen on NHK World, Lester Kenny Cosplay. I bet you've seen him on Japanology Plus. He knows Peter Barakan. If he knows Peter Barakan and I know Josh, then my bacon number with Peter Barakan is shrinking all the time. So, and my bacon number with Chris Pepler, because we know Lisa, right? So anyway, thank you so much for being with us. next month, we will be back on the second Monday of the month because my vaccines are over. So hopefully I will be in perfect health for May. And we will be talking about origami jewelry and then jewelry with found objects. Very basic supplies, very basic ways to make fabulous pendants and earrings with only a few dollars of supplies, and you can have a real personal touch. My email is going on the bottom of the screen if you would like to be on the mailing list. If maybe you don't see our social media announcements and you always want to know when this show and Japan Stories is going to be going live, drop me an email or sign up on that emailing list at the bottom. I will make sure that you find out whenever Make Your Monday or Japan Stories is coming up and who will be on it. So thanks again so much. Also, don't forget to go on the Okashicon Facebook page if you are into Japanese fashion for the flower frills. What's the name of the thing again? Floral Frill for All, which is coming up on May 8th. There is no limit to the number of people who can attend. So certainly dress up in your floral finest and go meet other J fashion enthusiasts. Thanks so much. I appreciate you all, and I really appreciate the comments. So thanks again. See you on Sunday. Bye-bye.